intense back-and-forth attacks. And as for President Trump, once again, we're at a critical juncture, nuclear or war, so what should be done? This is a moment that really deserves our attention. Another thing is, who was the real winner in Tuesday's primary? What does this signal for the midterm elections? That's our second topic. Third, Europe's sixth-generation fighter jet program has been announced as scrapped. What's going on here? What does this mean for Europe's future direction, and how will it affect its relationship with the U.S.? Also, two major events are about to take place in America. The World Cup is about to kick off this Saturday. In addition, the celebration for the 250th anniversary of the founding of the country is also being grandly launched. So, what exactly are these things? This is what Feng Wei is bringing to you today. All right, welcome to Good Morning America, brought to you by Feng Wei. Hello to all our viewers on YouTube, and greetings to all our listeners on Sound of Hope, Silicon Valley FM 96.1. All right, before we get started, let me tell everyone that the Feng Wei Finance channel is now up and running. This is our second channel. So our editors will post the Feng Wei Finance programs below, including the one about SpaceX, which is set to go public this Friday. We've already done 2 episodes on this, and I believe what you see here is information you won't find anywhere else. It's not just Feng Wei's own work. The main sources are actually experts in this field. I'm collaborating with these experts to bring you Feng Wei Finance. So, I want to welcome everyone. After this show is over, please go check out the Feng Wei Finance channel and subscribe. In short, for this new channel to grow, we really need the strong support of our viewers from the main channel. I also hope that your time spent over there won't be wasted. You'll definitely gain a lot from it. All right, let's get straight to the point and talk about today's topic. On Tuesday, the U.S. struck 20 targets in Iran as a response to Iran using drones to attack an American Apache attack helicopter. So as we mentioned to everyone, on Monday, an American Apache attack helicopter was patrolling the Gulf of Oman when it was hit by an Iranian drone. President Trump has now already detailed the specifics of this incident. This drone crashed into the helicopter, ended up inside, and got stuck. Trump said it got wedged between the 2 crew members. Actually, the pilot sits in front and the gunner sits in the back, and it got stuck between them, burning there. But fortunately, it didn't explode. Of course, the helicopter had already been damaged, so the pilot made an emergency landing on the water, and basically it sank into the sea. So the pilot and the gunner were left floating in the ocean. Of course, they had life jackets, and they floated for 2 hours. At that point, a ship at sea. This so-called U.S. military unmanned boat automatically went to the spot where they fell into the water, rescued the 2 people, and then transported them to another location. After that, a helicopter came and picked them up again, bringing them back to an even safer place. Actually, the U.S. has been testing the use of unmanned surface vessels to locate and recover downed crew members for many years, but this time it was a real-life application, and a very successful one at that. So Trump called this a great, or as he put it, an incredible rescue. Now, what exactly is this unmanned boat? It's made by an American company called Cerberus Technology, and it's known as the Pirate model, which is an autonomous surface vessel. The official term is autonomous surface vessel, which basically just means unmanned boat. Each of these boats is about 24 feet long, which is roughly 8 meters, and it can carry up to 1,000 pounds. As for its range, it can go about 1,000 nautical miles, so its endurance is pretty impressive. That's about 1,500 kilometers. It can travel 1,500 kilometers on its own. This boat really can go a very, very long distance. It can go halfway around the world. So, at the same time, in response to Iran's drone attacks, U.S. fighter jets struck about 20 Iranian air defense systems, ground control stations, and surveillance radars near the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the U.S. military has announced that the operation is over. Then, Iran said it was preparing to strike back. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard announced that it had attacked 21 U.S. air and naval bases in the Middle East. The targets reportedly included U.S. military sites in Bahrain, Kuwait, and, for the first time, Jordan. As you know, Jordan is quite far from Iran, over 1,000 kilometers away. Iran claimed they targeted U.S. bases in Jordan, saying they destroyed one in Jordan, the hangar for 15 F-15s and a command center, and also shot down an MQ-9 Reaper drone known as the Reaper over Iranian airspace. Of course, that's just what Iran claims. The U.S. military says no. The U.S. hasn't acknowledged any of these things. So when both sides are saying different things, if you ask me, and this is Fang Wei's commentary here, what Iran says is basically not very credible. At the same time, U.S. officials have already stated that almost all of the incoming attacks were intercepted. Iran also claims that among the targets hit by the U.S. military was a reservoir, and that about 20,000 Iranians at two reservoirs lost access to drinking water after the strikes. The U.S. military has not verified this claim. So if you ask me, again, this is Fang Wei's commentary, it's very likely that Iran is just making things up again. That's not the case at all. However, President Trump did say that he might order strikes as soon as tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow, today, on Wednesday, ordering the U.S. military to start attacking Iran's power plants and bridges. Trump said, I may be going on. He said he might keep escalating the attacks. They once had a chance to sign an agreement and survive. Be able to survive. President Trump said that during negotiations, Iran kept taking advantage of the United States, and in the end, these talks made almost no progress. This is exactly what we've been sharing with everyone all along, right? These kinds of negotiations really don't lead anywhere. President Trump also posted on social media saying that Iran's military is in complete chaos, totally disorganized. For example, their Navy and Air Force basically no longer exist. They've been completely defeated. So what about Iran now? All they do is talk big, but there's no real action. The Middle Eastern bully is already dead. What President Trump means by saying this is to tell the Gulf countries, don't be afraid of them. They're already finished. Trump said they spent too long negotiating. They could have reached a deal that was very favorable to them, but now they're going to have to pay the price. All right, let's look back for a moment. From April 8th to June 10th, that means they negotiated for 2 months. Both sides talked for 2 months, but there were no results, you could say. So what now? Are they going to get serious again? Is Trump going to pick up the heavy hammer and strike hard once more? So before I share my own opinion, before I give you Fang Wei's take, let me first review the whole course of this trade war. This is really my interpretation, my analysis, my commentary. You can call it whatever you like. This is Fang Wei's perspective. First of all, this whole thing started in the second half of 2025 when Treasury Secretary Besson, under Trump's direction, decided to put maximum pressure on the Iranian authorities. So the U.S. began imposing an economic blockade on Iran. Well, you know, for those who aren't familiar with Besson, actually, back in the day, he was Soros's top guy in international finance, especially when it came to currency operations. In the world of international finance, there was really no one better than him. Trump chose well for Treasury Secretary. What did he do? Regarding Iran, he took several steps. First, he cut off their oil exports entirely. Second, he cut off their access to hard currency, especially U.S. dollars. Then he drove up inflation inside Iran, which led to bank failures at the end of last December. The central bank was forced to print money, and then there was a shortage of U.S. dollars. And because of this dollar shortage, without U.S. dollars, they couldn't import goods. Prices soared, sparking strikes and shop closures. Protests erupted. But in early January, Iran's crackdown killed thousands. On January 14th, Trump launched Middle East fighter jets to punish Iran for the violence. However, despite taking off, the planes were suddenly ordered to stand down and return that same night. Because someone advised Trump that our military strength wasn't sufficient, if we attacked Iran and Iran struck back and we couldn't handle it, we'd end up suffering instead. So what happened next? Trump spent the next 45 days moving troops and making preparations, and it wasn't until February 28th that the fighting officially began. And when Trump started the fight, he was still acting on the momentum from January 14th. At least that's how I interpret it. The motivation from January 14th wasn't about regime change. It was about teaching Iran a lesson. He never intended to change the regime. That wasn't his goal. Even among the 4 main objectives he initially listed, none of them was regime change. So what were they? Taking out the Navy, eliminating the nuclear weapons and nuclear program, destroying the ballistic missile program, and not allowing the proxy forces across the Middle East to continue receiving support. Changing the regime would be the best outcome. When fighting started February 28th, Trump even told the Iranian people this was their best chance to rise up. They chose that date because intelligence from Israel suggested an opportunity to take down the top Iranian leadership all at once. And as for the Iranian leadership, including Khamenei himself, the attacks against them were also carried out by Israel's Air Force. So at that time, I think Trump was definitely hoping to replicate the successful Venezuela model in Iran. But the problem is, Iran is a rogue regime, and it's a theocratic government. So even if you attack them, you can't bring them down. It's not like with Maduro, where after he was captured, everything just fell apart. Then Iran responded by attacking countries in the Gulf at random. In addition, they threatened to block the Strait of Hormuz. So it turned into a threat against the whole world and the Gulf countries, which became a political cost for Trump, since oil prices would soar. As a result, the Trump administration responded with an anti-blockade, leading to a standoff in the Strait of Hormuz, where both sides were choking each other off. But it's true, as we can see, the reason there was a 2-month ceasefire in the past 2 months is because Trump didn't want to fight anymore. He was facing the 250th anniversary of the United States, the upcoming celebrations, the World Cup being held in the U.S., and the midterm elections. Then there's the Save America Act and fixing the election system. Both are way more important than Iran. Despite the constant talk, for Trump, Iran is only a fraction as important as those other issues. But there's nothing you can do about it. For the media, news events are always the top priority. They don't necessarily focus on what's most important. That's why Iran keeps making the headlines. So actually, Trump wants to pull back, and he's trying to do that through a ceasefire and negotiations. Trump scaled back his goals. The Navy acted, but nuclear weapons must be stopped. He's letting ballistic missiles and proxy forces slide, insisting only on 2 things: reopening the strait and Iran abandoning nuclear weapons. Everything else is fine with him. Trump figured there'd be no issue. His demands dropped significantly, so Iran should agree. But they're a rogue regime. Sensing weakness, they pushed back. Iran has 3 demands. First, no nuclear concessions, a total deadlock. Second, Iran says, you attacked me, so pay compensation. Iran's compensation demands include their frozen assets. Trump rejected their initial demand for direct payment, so Iran asked for their assets back. Trump's response was essentially, you're lucky I didn't kill you, and now you want money? Not happening. Finally, Iran wants the U.S. to stop Israel from attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon, their strongest proxy force. Iran wants this proxy to survive. Regarding nuclear weapons, Trump won't make concessions. He also can't offer compensation, having harshly criticized Obama for sending money to Iran. Trump definitely won't repeat that. So Trump wouldn't budge on those 2 points. The third point, though, was restraining Israel, and Trump actually did that because he really wanted to sign a peace agreement. He really did put strict restraints on Israel, which is why on Monday, after Israel fought for a while, they stopped. But even with these moves from Trump, Iran wasn't satisfied. They just kept dragging things out. They wanted to stall the negotiations, to buy time, to drag Trump into the 250th anniversary celebrations. Dragging it into the World Cup, dragging it into the midterm elections. That's the situation. So that's what's been happening. The key question now is, what should be done? Right now, Trump is really at a critical crossroads, a kind of dialectical turning point. So what arguments does he have to make? Let me tell you, I think there are 4 options, 4 strategies. There's the best option, a middle option, a lesser option, and the worst option. These are just my ideas. This is Feng Wei's commentary. The best move would be to use all 4 tactics at once. The U.S. military keeps bombing, Israel keeps bombing as well. So actually, Trump has an ace up his sleeve, a real trump card. Trump has an ace, and that ace is the Iranian prince. Release the prince and let him go change the regime. At the same time, arm the Iranian people. There are only 4 moves. At the start, the U.S. military, Israeli forces, the prince, and the Iranian people. If they need money, give them money. If they need guns, give them guns. I think the Iranian mullah regime would be overthrown very quickly because this regime has absolutely no support from the people. Ordinary folks are... The mullah regime's suffering is unbearable. Everyone's awaiting the royal family's return. They're waiting for the prince or the U.S. military. It's the best strategy. If Trump decides, Iran collapses within 2 months. In this strategy, Israel is the bad cop, while the U.S. and Trump play good cop. If Iran leaves the table, Israel strikes to force him back. If they won't negotiate, Israel keeps attacking. This way, the U.S. avoids all risk and responsibility. Israel, however, fears neither, making this setup work perfectly. They're using a two-pronged approach to force an agreement. This lower-tier strategy involves bombing infrastructure to force Iran to the table. It's a tough approach, but Trump believes that damaging an economy enough will make them give in and sign a deal. But Iran isn't like that. They have to beat the U.S. in order to maintain their grip on power at home. So the worst strategy is to do nothing at all. Just keep things at a stalemate, keep negotiating, keep calling for peace, and hope that by blockading Iran, they'll eventually back down. The blockade by the British, plus the U.S. military blockade in the Gulf of Oman, is definitely strong. But I think Iran could hold out for a year or two without any real problems. They're poor, but that makes them adaptable. With 80 or 90 million people, Iran can rely on internal circulation to feed itself and survive without many imports or exports. They're totally capable of that. So that's why I say this is really the worst option. So what do y'all think? If I talk about these four options, let's call them the top, upper middle, lower middle, and bottom options. Which path do you think Trump is most likely to take? Let's talk about it. Everyone, we can actually do a poll to see what everyone thinks. Moving on to domestic politics in the U.S., since that's what Trump cares about most. And what is it that people say about America again? Make America great, right? This is like the saying, govern your family, then bring peace to the world. But here, family means the nation. Trump believes that only when America is in order can the world be at peace. Now, let's talk about how the House of Representatives just passed a $70 billion immigration enforcement funding bill. Before we get into that, let's first talk about the California election. The Associated Press has already announced that Steve Hilton has advanced to the gubernatorial race. As of 6 p.m. on Tuesday, California had counted 88% of the votes, with Hilton receiving 25% of the vote. His opponent, Democrat Becerra, has 28%. So these are the two top-ranking candidates. Hilton, who was previously leading in the race, now enters the November 3rd runoff as the underdog. And the nonpartisan organization called the Cook Political Report believes that this seat is ultimately leaning solidly toward the Democrats because among registered voters in California, Democrats number as many as 10.4 million. Registered Republican voters only number 5.8 million, which is a huge gap. As for independent voters, there are 5.3 million. In my opinion, if nothing changes, Hilton's chances on November 3rd are zero. So what would count as a change? Only if the Save America Act passes, or if the Supreme Court makes a strong ruling, plus the Department of Justice investigates, and something comes out of those investigations. If these things happen, they could have a huge impact on the California election process. Is it possible for California to elect a Republican governor? In my opinion, the probability is over 80%. Why? It's very simple. It's the pendulum effect. No matter which state it is, when one party dominates for too long, if you don't do a good job, voters will choose someone else. That's just how it works in a democratic society. So the Democratic Party has held the California governorship for 16 years now. From Schwarzenegger until now, it's been 16 years. People in California are definitely ready to change. Even if they're Democrats, they'll feel like they want change. So it's only natural to want change and to be ready for it. So being ready for change is natural. That's why I think Hilton's chances of winning could be as high as 80%. But the problem is, you, voters, need a way to actually make that change. If the election process isn't reliable, how can they make that change? So that's the issue. For California's elections, or rather for there to be any real change in California, the Save America Act absolutely has to pass. That's the current situation as I see it. All right, let's talk about the House of Representatives. On Tuesday, yesterday, they passed the Senate version of what's called the Budget Reconciliation Act by a vote of 214 to 212. Wow, just a one-vote difference. If just one vote had gone the other way, it wouldn't have passed. So it passed 214 to 212. This is what I usually refer to as the Reconciliation Act. The main purpose of this act is to provide funding for the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP. As I said, ICE handles domestic enforcement and CBP covers the borders. This act provides $70 billion for both agencies over 3 years. The bill passed the Senate and yesterday cleared the House by 1 vote. You might have heard it was 2, but it was just 1. A single vote difference would have killed it. Now it goes to President Trump to be signed into law. So basically, the voting went strictly along party lines. All the votes in favor came from Republican members, and all the votes against were from Democratic members. But there was one exception, a so-called independent. This independent is actually a Republican congressman from California named Kelly something, anyway, from Northern California, named Kevin Kelly. Why did he vote against it? Because after redistricting, he had no hope of winning in his district anymore. So he gave up on the Republican Party and rebranded himself as an independent. So this independent status was really out of desperation. He's still a Republican at heart. Anyway, this bill has passed both chambers, and Trump will definitely sign it into law, so it will take effect. So what does this mean? It means that ICE and CBP will receive stable funding for the next 3 years. Otherwise, every year when it comes to the budget, it always gets stuck at this point because, well, it's the Department of Homeland Security, and it always hits a snag. This year has already been held up for so long, from the end of last year all the way to June this year, and only passed through reconciliation. Once the funding is allocated for the next 3 years, the annual government budget won't need to include this category anymore. Basically, it means they have the money. That's what it comes down to. This ensures that the current immigration enforcement situation under the Trump administration in the U.S. can continue for 3 years without any obstacles or changes. That's what it means. Also, let me talk a bit about how this was passed. You might have noticed there was no filibuster. So you only have 53 votes. How come there was no filibuster? That's because they used a reconciliation bill. Reconciliation only needs a majority to pass. This is a tool Republicans use just once a year. What about a few days ago? So the senator from South Carolina's federal senator, Graham, right? He wanted to include the Safe American Act, the Save America Act, into the reconciliation bill we just talked about. But what happened? It didn't work out. There were 2 obstacles. The first obstacle was that 4 Republicans themselves broke ranks and voted against it. So Tom Tillis from North Carolina, he broke ranks because he wasn't running for re-election anyway, and basically he and Trump just don't get along. He had no hope of getting re-elected at all, so he just gave up. Since he was done anyway, he figured he might as well go all out and wasn't afraid to confront Trump head on. The second one was McConnell. McConnell also isn't running for re-election, and he didn't agree either. I honestly can't figure out why he disagreed. The third one is Susan Collins, who also disagreed. Fourth is that senator from Alaska, Lisa Murkowski, right? She also disagreed. So in the end, they couldn't even get it through themselves. So of course, there was nothing to talk about. Now, if you say they could have passed it themselves, if only 3 people defected, right? If Vance came over, that would be 50 plus 1, which is 51. But there's still another hurdle, and they couldn't get past that either, because there's someone called the Senate Parliamentary. I've mentioned this before, called the Parliamentary Officer. The parliamentarian, yeah. It's called the Congressional Parliamentarian. You have to get past them. In their view, your Save America Act, this reform of the electoral system, has nothing to do with the budget, nothing to do with money, so it doesn't comply with the budget law. This is called a reconciliation bill, and there's a related rule called the Byrd Rule. Yeah, it's called the Byrd Rule. The Byrd Rule. Basically, the reconciliation bill, which can be passed with a simple majority and only once a year, can only be about money. You can't just throw anything you want into it, so you can't get past that hurdle either. Even if only 3 votes are lost instead of 4, you still can't get past that hurdle. So what to do about this? Yesterday, Trump tweeted about it. I didn't mention it to y'all yesterday. If you follow Trump for a while, you'll know he likes to make statements with images and text. He said, replace that Senate parliamentarian. He said, that person was appointed back when Obama was in office, so why are you still keeping him? Replace him with someone who supports us. But the parliamentarian refused. Yeah, they just don't dare to do it. So basically, there's no way to get it through, can't get past either hurdle. Okay, so that's why. So regarding the failure of the Save America version, it's because Graham wanted to include the Save America court into the matching bill, but it failed. It's not that the Save America bill itself didn't succeed. Another way to approach it is, well, one way is from Senator Mike Lee of Utah. He wanted to amend the Save America bill itself. So he talked to Susan Collins and said, how about this? Let's relax it a little bit. You don't need to show your citizenship certificate when voting, but when you register as a voter, you do need to show your citizenship certificate. Some viewers have told me, isn't that still a loophole? What if someone else votes in your place? They say it's another person, but that's not the case. What they're saying is that you don't need to show your citizenship certificate when voting. But you still have to show an ID when voting. It's just that the ID can be a driver's license, so the person can't really be switched out. So basically, it's not a big deal. Then McConnell said, all right, I'll relax on this point. And Susan Collins said, if that's the case, then I'll vote in favor. So that time, there were 50 votes, 50 plus 1. So if Susan keeps this position, the Safe America Act can be passed within the Republican Party. As soon as they get Susan Collins on board, it's a done deal. It's also fine if 3 votes go the other way because it's 50 plus 1 plus J.D. Vance. So there's hope it could pass. Right before I started recording this show, a viewer left a comment asking me, could Vance replace Tuberville? Well, the chances of that happening are pretty slim, but there is a possible path. What would it take? It would require McConnell to persuade Vance. He'd have to tell him, drop everything else, prioritize the Save America Act, replace Tuberville for 3 months, and take charge of the rules. Fight this battle daily on the front lines. Then push the Save America Act through. Okay, at the same time, McConnell would also have to go to Thune and say, I know you don't really want to do something that's unpleasant, forcing the other side to speak out. I found someone to play the bad cop. Do you want to play the good cop? Just stand by and wait. We're not removing you, we're just letting you speak so that Vance can handle this matter. If Thune nods in agreement as well, then this could actually happen. It's as simple as that. So let's just watch and see how this plays out. The key point of this whole thing is, where exactly does the crux of the matter lie? Actually, it all comes down to whether McClahey can convince these 2 people, right? Okay, now let's go back to what we were just talking about, the passage of the so-called Intercom Act, or rather, the passage of this 3-year funding bill. There was actually quite a bit of debate about it in the House. What was the main difficulty in getting it passed? It was the $1.8 billion so-called weapons de-weaponization fund proposed by President Trump. What does that mean? Basically, Trump proposed that we set aside $1.8 billion. I've already talked about this, right? Trump said, I'm suing the IRS. Then I settled with the IRS. Originally, I was going to sue the IRS for $10 billion, but now I've settled and I'm not asking for a single cent. But the Department of Justice, you need to come up with $1.8 billion to compensate ordinary people who were persecuted through weaponization during the Biden era. To put it plainly, he wants to compensate those victims who were arrested on January 6th, those who were forced to go to jail, forced to fight lawsuits. And, lawsuits in the U.S. are really expensive. Back then, when the government was going after them, the government has its own lawyers, but regular folks paid out of pocket. For them, jail wasn't the biggest loss. Some faced legal fees over $1 million. Many who went to the Capitol on January 6th weren't wealthy. $1 million in fees is devastating for anyone. You could say they lost everything just paying for lawyers. Most of that money was borrowed, and for many families, it basically ruined them. That's the situation. So Trump couldn't bear to see it. He wanted to raise $1.8 billion to pay him back, to compensate him. Because if you want to overturn the verdicts in court, that's a long process. So the idea is to first pay him back. So what was the result? This issue wasn't just opposed by Democrats. Even Republicans like Toomey were against it. They all thought, how can this be? This goes against constitutional principles. So in the end, Acting Attorney General Blanche told Congress that the Justice Department would not move forward with the fund. They said, let's just pass this bill, drop the fund, and stop arguing. Let's get this law passed first, and then we'll deal with the ICE and CBP funding later.